The moment you start running after people, approval, attention, love, or validation, something inside you begins to collapse. And the painful truth is not just that others notice it. The deeper truth is that you notice it too. You feel it in the way your peace disappears. You feel it in the way your thoughts become desperate. You feel it in the way your worth starts depending on whether someone answers, stays, chooses you, or finally sees what you bring to the table. That is why chasing always costs more than dignity alone. It does not only lower your value in the eyes of others, it lowers your value in your own eyes. And once that happens, you are no longer trying to build a life. You are trying to earn permission to feel enough. A lot of people spend years believing that effort is always noble. That if you care, you should prove it. That if you love, you should insist. That if you want something badly enough, you should keep knocking until the door opens. But life is not that simple. There is a difference between commitment and self-abandonment. There is a difference between persistence and emotional begging. There is a difference between showing interest and handing over your inner balance just to avoid being forgotten. And most people do not realize they crossed that line until they can no longer recognize themselves. This is why so many intelligent, good-hearted, emotionally deep people end up feeling invisible. Not because they have no value, but because they keep placing that value in the hands of people who never learned how to respect it. They keep offering more, explaining more, forgiving more, waiting more, enduring more. And then they wonder why they feel drained, overlooked, and quietly humiliated. But the Stoics understood something that modern life keeps trying to make you forget. The more your peace depends on what is outside you, the weaker you become inside. And once your emotional state is owned by something external, you are no longer free. That is the real danger of chasing. It is not just about losing someone. It is about losing command over yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote constantly about self-command, not because he lived in comfort, but because he understood that the mind becomes a battlefield the moment it gives the outside world too much authority. The problem is not desire itself. The problem is slavery to desire. Wanting connection is human. Wanting love is human. Wanting to be seen is human. But needing it so much that you betray your own center is where suffering begins. Because then every silence feels like rejection. Every delay feels personal. Every distance feels like proof that you are not enough. And now your life is being interpreted through wounds instead of wisdom. Think about how many times people lose themselves not in huge dramatic collapses, but in tiny daily compromises. Sending another message that should not be sent. Explaining themselves one more time to someone committed to misunderstanding them. Accepting crumbs because loneliness feels heavier than disrespect. Making excuses for coldness. Trying harder every time someone else becomes more distant. Shrinking their standards to keep someone from leaving. This is how self-respect dies. Quietly. Repeatedly. Not all at once, but piece by piece. And what makes it more painful is that from the outside, it can look like devotion. It can look like passion. It can even look like loyalty. But inside, it often feels like fear. Fear of being replaced. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of not being chosen. Fear of sitting alone with the question so many people spend their whole lives avoiding. Who am I when no one is validating me? That question changes everything. Because once you stop running, once you stop performing, once you stop trying to pull love, attention, or recognition out of people who are not offering it freely, you are finally left with yourself. And that moment can feel brutal at first. Because silence reveals what distraction was hiding. Distance reveals where your dependency was. Stillness reveals how much of your identity was built around being needed, being wanted, being reassured. But that same stillness is also where your life begins to return to you. Seneca warned again and again that suffering is multiplied by imagination. And nothing feeds unhealthy imagination like chasing. When you chase, you overthink. When you overthink, you create stories. When you create stories, you suffer from things that are not even happening yet. You begin interpreting every sign, every absence, every mood, every word, every pause. Your mind becomes restless because it is trying to control what cannot be controlled. But peace never comes from control of others. Peace comes from mastery of self. That is why stopping is not weakness. Stopping is discipline. Stopping means you finally understand that your value does not rise because someone finally notices it. Your value is not an auction. Your worth is not a negotiation. Your presence is not something that needs to beg for significance. The sun does not chase anyone to prove it gives light. A mountain does not beg to be admired. Depth does not scream. Truth does not perform. What is real does not need to run after recognition. It remains what it is. And that is hard to accept in a world that rewards noise, visibility, and constant emotional exposure. Today, people are taught to prove themselves endlessly. To post more. To explain more. To reveal more. To reach out more. To make themselves easier, more available, more accommodating, more understandable, more digestible. But the more you make yourself endlessly available, the more some people begin to treat your presence like air, necessary, but unnoticed. Not because you are ordinary, but because familiarity without boundaries often kills appreciation. Epictetus taught that freedom begins where dependence ends. That idea is simple, but it cuts deep. Because most people do not realize how dependent they have become until they feel ignored. Then suddenly their whole emotional structure shakes. Why? Because they were not just enjoying connection. They were leaning on it. They were building identity on it. They were asking another person's attention to carry the weight of their own self-worth. No relationship, no audience, no approval can hold that weight for long. It will always crack. And when it cracks, you fall with it. That is why the work is internal first. You do not stop chasing just to make others respect you more, even though sometimes they will. You stop chasing because you deserve to live without humiliating your own spirit. You stop chasing because your nervous system was not designed to survive on uncertainty and emotional starvation. You stop chasing because there comes a point where continuing to pursue what does not pursue you back becomes a form of self-betrayal. And no outer victory is worth inner erosion. Maybe this is hard to hear because some part of you still believes that letting go means losing. But sometimes letting go is the first proof that you are no longer willing to lose yourself. Read that again in your own heart. Sometimes letting go is the first proof that you are no longer willing to lose yourself. That is power. Quiet power. Mature power. Not the power of domination, but the power of self-possession. The kind of power that says, I can care without collapsing. I can love without begging. I can desire without chasing. I can walk away without hating. I can be disappointed without becoming desperate. That is the kind of strength the Stoics respected. Not emotional numbness. Not coldness. Not pretending not to care. Real strength is caring deeply without surrendering your center. And the truth is, people feel that difference. They can feel when someone is standing on their own feet and when someone is emotionally crawling for reassurance. They can feel when your attention is a gift and when it is a plea. They can feel when your silence comes from peace and when it comes from wounded strategy. That is why this shift cannot be fake. It has to come from genuine inner change. Not, I will stop chasing so they chase me. No. That is still dependency wearing a smarter outfit. The real shift is deeper. I will stop chasing because I finally understand my life cannot revolve around being chosen. That sentence alone can free a person. Because the one who is no longer obsessed with being chosen begins choosing differently. Choosing peace over confusion. Choosing self-respect over temporary closeness. Choosing clarity over mixed signals. Choosing discipline over emotional impulse. Choosing solitude over disrespect. Choosing inner order over outer chaos. And that is where life begins to clean itself up. Not all at once, but enough for you to breathe again. If this reflection is reaching something real inside you, take a second to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Sometimes one honest message arrives at the exact moment someone needed clarity more than comfort. A painful thing happens when you chase for too long. Eventually, you stop asking whether something is healthy and start asking only whether it can still be saved. That is how people remain attached to what is draining them. They become so focused on preserving the connection that they stop protecting themselves. They stop measuring peace. They stop measuring dignity. They stop measuring emotional cost. They only measure access. Do I still have a chance? Are they still here? Can I still fix this? But not everything that can be continued should be continued. Not every door that stays half open is meant for you to keep standing outside it. Sometimes the reason you feel so exhausted is not because life is hard. It is because you are trying to hold onto what your soul already knows is misaligned. And that inner conflict wears you down. Your mind says keep going. Your pride says prove yourself. Your fear says do not let go. But your deeper self, the quiet part of you that still knows truth, has been whispering something else for a long time. It has been saying, enough. Enough explaining. Enough reaching. Enough waiting in emotional hallways for a door that should have opened by now. Enough turning your worth into a request. The moment you hear that whisper and obey it, your healing starts. Not because the pain disappears immediately. It does not. But because for the first time in a long time, you are no longer adding fresh pain to old wounds. You are no longer participating in your own depletion. You are no longer calling suffering loyalty. You are no longer calling anxiety love. You are no longer calling pursuit devotion when it is really fear. And once you see that clearly, you cannot unsee it. Once you truly understand that chasing is not love, not loyalty, not strength, another uncomfortable truth begins to rise. A lot of what you called connection was actually attachment mixed with fear. And that is a hard truth, because fear can imitate love so convincingly that most people never question it. Fear says, do more so they stay. Fear says, be more patient, more available, more understanding, more forgiving, and maybe then you will be enough. Fear says, if you stop trying, everything will fall apart. But what fear never tells you is that when something only survives because you are the one carrying all of it, it was never really holding you with equal weight to begin with. This is why so many people confuse exhaustion with emotional depth. They believe that if something hurts enough, it must matter more. They believe that if they are suffering for it, then it must be meaningful. But pain is not always proof of value. Sometimes pain is only proof that you stayed too long in a place where your spirit was being trained to accept less than it deserves. Sometimes what you call a deep bond is just a deep wound you kept feeding because you were afraid of emptiness. And emptiness terrifies people. Not because emptiness is always dangerous, but because emptiness removes the noise. It removes the chase. It removes the obsession. It removes the illusion that your life is moving forward just because your emotions are constantly activated. When the mind is no longer running after someone, something, or some outcome, it is forced to face itself. And many people would rather stay emotionally exhausted than emotionally honest. That is why stopping can feel like withdrawal. Because, in a way, it is. You are withdrawing from the habit of external dependence. You are withdrawing from the constant need to check, interpret, hope, adjust, and anticipate. You are withdrawing from the small emotional hits your mind had grown used to. A reply, a sign, a little warmth, a temporary reassurance. You are withdrawing from the cycle that kept your nervous system busy but your soul malnourished. And in the first days of that inner separation, silence can feel unbearable. But silence is not your enemy. Silence is often where truth becomes impossible to ignore. In silence, you begin to realize how often you were abandoning yourself just to remain emotionally connected to what was unstable. In silence, you see how much of your energy was going into being noticed, remembered, chosen, reassured. In silence, you start noticing the deeper hunger beneath all of it. Not hunger for a person. Hunger for certainty. Hunger for worth. Hunger for peace. Hunger for the feeling that you are enough without having to perform that truth for someone else. And that is the turning point. Because once you identify the real hunger, you stop trying to feed it with the wrong things. A distracted world teaches people to cure emptiness with attention. The Stoics taught something completely different. They taught that inner instability cannot be healed by external supply. It has to be examined. It has to be disciplined. It has to be brought back under reason. Not cold reason that denies emotion, but clear reason that refuses to let emotion become your master. This matters because one of the greatest forms of suffering is not what others do to you. It is what your undisciplined mind keeps doing with what others do. A person becomes distant, and the mind creates 10 explanations. A message goes unanswered, and the mind turns it into a verdict on your worth. Someone changes their energy, and the mind immediately asks what you did wrong. But often, the mind is not perceiving reality. It is projecting fear onto reality. And when fear becomes the interpreter of your life, peace disappears even in moments where nothing has actually happened yet. This is why emotional discipline is not optional. It is survival. Without it, you become a prisoner of reaction. Every outside movement controls an inside collapse. Every shift in someone else becomes a shift in your whole identity. Every uncertainty throws you into mental chaos. But the moment you begin practicing restraint, not repression, but restraint, you reclaim space between stimulus and response. You stop letting your first feeling become your final truth. You stop worshiping urgency. You stop assuming that because something hurts, you must immediately act on it. That alone can save a life from years of unnecessary suffering. Because so much damage comes from the inability to sit still with discomfort. People chase because waiting feels unbearable. They explain because silence feels risky. They overgive because boundaries feel guilty. They cling because release feels like death. But discomfort is not always danger. Sometimes discomfort is just the feeling of an old pattern losing control over you. Sometimes the anxiety you feel when you stop chasing is not proof that you are doing the wrong thing. Sometimes it is proof that your dependency is being exposed. And dependency hates exposure. Dependency will tell you that self-respect is pride. It will tell you that boundaries are coldness. It will tell you that detachment is loss. It will tell you that choosing yourself means becoming selfish. But that is how unhealthy attachment protects itself. It uses guilt to keep you available for your own diminishment. It tells you to keep reaching, keep understanding, keep sacrificing, even when the price is your clarity, your dignity, your sleep, your focus, your peace. At some point, you have to ask a question that cuts through all the confusion. Why am I so willing to fight for what is draining me, but so reluctant to fight for my own inner stability? That question reveals something many people do not want to admit. They have been trained to associate self-neglect with goodness. They think being endlessly patient is noble even when it is destroying them. They think tolerating emotional confusion makes them mature. They think overextending themselves is proof of love. But love without self-respect becomes self-erasure. Patience without boundaries becomes permission. Understanding without standards becomes surrender. And surrendering your standards does not make you more lovable. It makes you easier to mistreat. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes intensely practical. It asks you to separate what belongs to you from what does not. Your effort belongs to you. Your conduct belongs to you. Your integrity belongs to you. Your thoughts, your choices, your restraint, your values, your ability to walk away from what corrupts your peace, all of that belongs to you. But another person's interest does not belong to you. Their consistency does not belong to you. Their attention does not belong to you. Their honesty, their maturity, their depth, their readiness, none of that belongs to you. And the moment you try to control what is not yours, you begin losing what is. That is why chasing always leaves you emptier. Because in trying to possess what was never yours to command, you lose contact with what was always yours to protect. So the work becomes clear, even if it is difficult. Return to yourself. Return to your standards. Return to your capacity to wait without panicking. Return to your ability to observe without immediately collapsing into interpretation. Return to the version of you that is not easily pulled out of alignment by every shift in the outside world. This return is not dramatic. It is quiet. It happens in private moments. In the moment you decide not to send the message. In the moment you stop rereading what already hurt you. In the moment you do not check again. In the moment you let silence remain silence instead of forcing an answer out of it. In the moment you feel the urge to run after reassurance, but choose to sit with yourself instead. These moments seem small, but they rebuild your soul brick by brick. Because every time you choose restraint over desperation, you teach your mind a new lesson. I can survive uncertainty without betraying myself. That sentence has power. It has power because most people have never really learned it. They learned how to react. They learned how to seek. They learned how to earn. They learned how to please. But they never learned how to remain. How to remain rooted when something outside them becomes unstable. How to remain whole when attention is withdrawn. How to remain dignified when they are not being chosen in the way they wanted. Yet that is exactly where strength lives. Not in being desired by everyone. Not in always being understood. Not in winning every emotional battle. Strength lives in being able to keep your center when reality does not go your way. Strength lives in not turning disappointment into self-destruction. Strength lives in not begging life to become easier before you allow yourself to become steadier. And this is where many people make a mistake. They think becoming steadier means becoming cold. They think they must stop feeling, stop caring, stop hoping, stop being soft. But Stoicism at its deepest level is not emotional deadness. It is emotional maturity. It is the refusal to let your feelings drag you into behavior that humiliates your spirit. It is the ability to feel longing without becoming a servant to it. To feel sadness without making impulsive decisions. To feel disappointment without turning against yourself. To feel rejection without assuming you are worthless. That kind of maturity changes how you move through the world. Suddenly, attention stops being a drug. Validation stops being a necessity. Delayed responses stop feeling like emergencies. Distance stops feeling like a collapse of your identity. And no, this does not mean you stop wanting closeness. It means you stop needing closeness in a way that makes you abandon your own peace. There is a profound difference between wanting to be loved and needing love to prove that you matter. One is human. The other is dangerous. Because the moment you need external confirmation to feel valuable, you will tolerate almost anything to keep it. Mixed signals, inconsistency, confusion, emotional half-presence. And all the while, your soul keeps paying the bill. So maybe the real question is not why people lose value when they chase. Maybe the deeper question is why they forget they had value before the chase even began. They forget because the world rewards pursuit. It celebrates proving yourself. It glamorizes emotional effort. But some of the most important things in life cannot be earned by self-abandonment. Respect cannot. Peace cannot. Real love cannot. The right things in life do not require you to shrink your dignity to keep them close. If this part of the reflection is speaking directly to something you have lived, leave a like and write one word in the comments that describes what this truth awakens in you. Sometimes a single word reveals more than a long explanation ever could. The more you recover your inner balance, the more clearly you start seeing people, situations, and patterns for what they are. And clarity can be painful, because it often shows you that you were not fighting for love. You were fighting against acceptance. Acceptance that something was one-sided. Acceptance that something had changed. Acceptance that your presence was not being met with equal care. Acceptance that no amount of effort can force depth into what is shallow. But acceptance is not defeat. Acceptance is the end of illusion. And once illusion ends, peace has a place to enter. So do not fear the emptiness that appears when you stop chasing. That emptiness is not the end of your worth. It is the space where your worth can finally stop being negotiated. It is the silence where your mind can recover from constant emotional noise. It is the place where you begin to understand that being alone with your dignity is infinitely better than being connected through self-betrayal. The person who learns this does not become bitter. They become clear. And clarity is one of the rarest forms of freedom. There comes a moment in every inner transformation when you realize that the real victory was never getting someone to stay, never getting more attention, never getting the answer you were waiting for. The real victory was becoming someone who no longer falls apart in the absence of those things. And that is a different kind of power than most people spend their lives chasing. It is quieter, less visible, less dramatic, but infinitely more stable. Because now your peace is no longer built on what changes every day. It is built on something deeper. On the understanding that your worth was never meant to rise and fall with another person's response. That realization does not come all at once. Usually, it arrives after disappointment, after emotional fatigue, after you have replayed the same pattern enough times to finally see that the pattern itself is the wound. You reach, they pull away. You explain, they remain unclear. You give more, they value less. You wait, you overthink, you hope, you suffer, and then you tell yourself the same lie one more time. Maybe if I do this differently, maybe if I become lighter, easier, better, softer, less intense, more patient, more useful, more understanding, then I will finally receive what I keep trying to earn. But peace begins the day you stop trying to earn what should be given freely. That is the shift. Not becoming hard. Not becoming indifferent. Not pretending not to care. The shift is this: you stop making your soul work for scraps. You stop asking your heart to survive on confusion. You stop presenting your worth before the court of unstable people and hoping for a fair verdict. You begin to understand that your life cannot be built around waiting for someone else to act right. And when that understanding becomes real, your energy changes. You move slower, but with more certainty. You speak less, but with more weight. You feel more, but react less. You no longer rush to close every distance, solve every silence, repair every disconnect. You start letting reality reveal itself. You start giving people room to show who they are without interrupting the truth by overcompensating for them. And this alone saves you from so much suffering, because many people are not confused about you. They are simply comfortable receiving effort they have no intention of matching. That truth stings. But it also liberates. Because once you accept that, you stop personalizing everything. You stop turning every lack of reciprocity into a flaw in yourself. You stop assuming that every door that remains closed is proof that you were not enough. Sometimes the door is closed because there is nothing meaningful behind it. Sometimes the inconsistency is not a puzzle for you to solve. Sometimes the distance is not a challenge to overcome. Sometimes it is simply the truth, and truth does not become kinder because you refuse to look at it. The Stoics understood this well. They knew that suffering increases when reality is resisted. Not because reality is always easy, but because resistance adds illusion, and illusion prolongs pain. When you keep chasing what is not moving toward you, you are not just fighting circumstances. You are fighting truth. And truth always wins, only the cost becomes greater when you delay accepting it. This is why maturity looks a lot like release. Release of the need to be chosen by everyone. Release of the need to explain your value to those committed to missing it. Release of the need to turn every loss into a personal failure. Release of the fantasy that one more effort will transform someone into who you needed them to be. Release of the belief that your role in life is to prove, persuade, convince, and wait. And once that release begins, something beautiful happens. You start returning to yourself not as a backup plan, but as home. That matters more than people realize. Because many people only come back to themselves after the outside world has disappointed them enough. But real healing begins when returning to yourself stops being a reaction to pain and becomes a way of life. You begin checking in with your own conscience before seeking reassurance from the world. You begin protecting your mental atmosphere the way you once protected fragile connections. You begin honoring your peace with the seriousness you once reserved for people who barely honored your presence. That is where dignity is rebuilt. Not in a speech. Not in revenge. Not in suddenly becoming emotionally unavailable. Dignity is rebuilt in the quiet decision to no longer abandon yourself. In the discipline of no longer offering your energy where there is no mutual care. In the awareness that not every invitation deserves your presence, not every connection deserves your vulnerability, not every loss deserves your pursuit. And perhaps one of the deepest signs of growth is this. You stop feeling the need to prove your absence. You do not leave to be noticed. You do not become silent to create a reaction. You do not detach as a performance. You simply become less available to what disturbs your soul. Calmly, clearly, without hatred, without spectacle, without needing applause for your restraint. That is a rare kind of freedom. Because now your actions are no longer controlled by ego wounds. You are not saying, I will show them. You are saying, I will protect what is sacred in me. And when a person reaches that point, life changes. Not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because they stop giving the world unlimited access to their inner balance. This is where many people discover that peace is not a reward. It is a practice. A practice of not reacting to everything. A practice of not interpreting every delay as rejection. A practice of not feeding every fear with attention. A practice of not calling anxiety intuition. A practice of observing desire without becoming ruled by it. A practice of pausing long enough to ask, is this pulling me toward dignity or away from it? That question can save you from entire seasons of regret. Because so many mistakes are not made from evil. They are made from emotional hunger. From loneliness. From fear of loss. From the inability to sit with uncertainty. From the urge to relieve pain quickly instead of understanding it deeply. And when pain is not understood, it leads. It decides. It sends the message. It accepts the half-love. It stays too long. It lowers the standard. It confuses attachment with fate. It confuses intensity with meaning. It confuses pursuit with purpose. But a steadier mind begins to see through all of that. It begins to understand that not everything intense is true. Not everything familiar is safe. Not everything desired is good. Not everything lost should be recovered. That wisdom is quiet, but it protects you. It protects you from returning to what already cost you too much. It protects you from begging life to restore what life may have removed for your own growth. It protects you from wasting years trying to be recognized by people who can only value what is easy, loud, or convenient. It protects you from the tragedy of having a deep soul but living at the mercy of shallow responses. And once you really see this, your relationship with absence changes. Absence no longer automatically means panic. Silence no longer automatically means collapse. Distance no longer automatically means you must close it. Loss no longer automatically means you must chase what left. Sometimes absence is instruction. Sometimes silence is revelation. Sometimes distance is protection. Sometimes loss is life clearing a space your fear would never have cleared on its own. That does not mean every ending is easy. It does not mean detachment is painless. It does not mean the heart suddenly becomes immune. It means you stop worshiping what hurts you. You stop romanticizing your own depletion. You stop treating emotional struggle as proof that something is meant to stay. And in that clarity, you begin relating to life with more sobriety, more self-respect, and more inner command. Marcus Aurelius often returned to the idea that your mind takes the shape of what it repeatedly entertains. That is why what you keep feeding matters so much. If you keep feeding longing without truth, you weaken yourself. If you keep feeding obsession without discipline, you confuse yourself. If you keep feeding attachment without boundaries, you lose yourself. But if you feed clarity, restraint, acceptance and self-command, slowly your life begins to reflect that order. And order is healing. Not a perfect life. Not a painless life. But an ordered life. A life where your reactions are not ruling you. A life where your worth is not constantly under negotiation. A life where you no longer need everyone to understand you in order to remain grounded. A life where you can feel disappointment and still remain intact. That is the kind of life many people secretly want, even if they do not yet know how to build it. And maybe that is why this message matters. Because there are people listening right now who are tired. Tired of overgiving. Tired of overthinking. Tired of caring more than the situation deserves. Tired of feeling their value disappear every time they are not immediately seen, answered, or chosen. Tired of carrying emotional weight that was never theirs alone to carry. If that is you, then hear this carefully. Your exhaustion is not a sign that you need to try harder. It may be a sign that you need to stop betraying your own peace. Sometimes the most healing sentence a person can say is not, "I will make this work." Sometimes it is, "I will no longer force what costs me my center." That sentence creates space. Space for dignity. Space for breath. Space for sleep. Space for silence that does not feel like punishment. Space for self-respect to return where desperation once lived. And once self-respect returns, everything starts looking different. You notice faster when something is one-sided. You feel sooner when your energy is not being honored. You become less willing to call inconsistency a connection. You stop romanticizing people who only appear when it benefits them. You stop negotiating with what your intuition has already made clear. You begin to trust your inner clarity more than your temporary longing. That trust is priceless. Because longing can lie. Fear can lie. Ego can lie. Loneliness can lie. But a calm conscience, when you are honest with it, usually does not lie. So perhaps the deeper lesson was never just stop chasing. Perhaps the deeper lesson is this. Become the kind of person who no longer needs to chase what is not aligned. That is a lifetime practice. A practice of building inner abundance so you do not cling from lack. A practice of developing emotional discipline so you do not react from panic. A practice of honoring your own value so you do not hand it away in moments of weakness. A practice of remembering, again and again, that your life becomes lighter when it is no longer organized around gaining what refuses to stay. And maybe that is the wisdom hidden inside all of this pain. What left may have taken your comfort for a moment, but it also revealed where you still needed to return to yourself. What did not choose you may have hurt your heart, but it also exposed the places where you were still asking the outside world to define the inside. What made you chase may have wounded your pride, but it also gave you the chance to build something far stronger than being desired. Being grounded. If this reflection stayed with you until here, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and write in the comments the one word that best describes what you are ready to let go of. Sometimes naming it is the first real act of freedom. And now, before this ends, let this truth settle quietly in you. You do not lose value because someone fails to see you. You lose peace when you keep running after what requires you to forget who you are. You do not become powerful by forcing outcomes. You become powerful by remaining centered when outcomes do not obey your desire. You do not heal by controlling who stays. You heal by learning that your wholeness was never supposed to depend on that. So stop running. Not because you are giving up. Not because you do not care. Not because you have become cold. Stop running because your soul deserves rest. Stop running because your dignity deserves protection. Stop running because what is truly meant for your life will not require the destruction of your inner balance to enter it. Stop running because there is a kind of strength that only appears when desperation ends. And maybe the real power was never in being pursued. Maybe the real power was always in this, to stand still, to remain clear, to keep your self-respect, and to let life reveal what belongs without chasing what does not. Because in the end, the strongest person in the room is not the one who can make everyone stay. It is the one who can remain whole, even when they do not.